right? So the rise of modern warfare with the First World War, what we're seeing here is that the First World War is really a change in history. This is where we actually see the advent of the modern era. We start to see that history will be changed forever with the First World War, right? And we're gonna oh sorry, I just raised my own hand, and we're gonna talk about it. We're just gonna have a discussion about it. So let's look at the state of Europe in the early 20th century, before the war, right? So the calm before the start. We have to talk about different things. These are really the causes. So the alliances, right? Before the outbreak of the First World War, right? There were a lot of alliances put together, especially after the Napoleonic era and 30 Years' War and these other types of wars that were happening in Europe, etc. Right? There were a lot of different things that were occurring, right? So, in order to try to make sure that Europe will not like have to face large enemies again, really, or large groups of enemies, everybody really created a buddy system. This is what we call the alliance system, right? We created Europe was really characterized by a complex web of alliances, right? Intense nationalism, of course, right? So the pride of one's nation, right? So if you were British, you better be going for Britain the entire way, right? And intense nationalism for your nation itself. The nation state became a real thing. Nations weren't always things, right? Nations came with the advent of nationalism, right? So we had that there, and a prevailing sense of glorification of war. So the continent was divided into two major alliance systems. The Triple Alliance consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, and the Triple Entente, right? Not compromise, comprising, right, France, Russia, and Britain. And these alliance systems were formed primarily as defensive measures, but also served to increase tensions and rivalries among European powers, right? So as we said, it's a type of defense system, right? If you are allied with more powers, then people would be less likely to hurt you or think twice before invading you, right? Nationalism, though. Nationalism was a very powerful force within Europe, right? With countries vying for dominance, asserting their interests through military build-ups and territorial expansion. So it's basically saying, right, if you're a part of one nation, my nation is the best nation, my nation is the greatest nation, right? And because I'm so nationalist, I believe in my nation, right? So I'm not just an individual, I am a member of this nation, and this nation is me, right? Therefore, what we're looking at is the glorification of the nation state itself, right? The nation wants to see itself as the best nation in Europe, right? And actually go through territorial expansion, trying to prove that, okay, it's bigger, it's better, it's bolder than the other neighbors, right? And they all build up their military, right? To show who has the biggest guns, right? Who has the biggest stick in case of any type of conflict, right? So they're trying to show that they're the best nation through nationalism, right? The glorification of war was really widespread throughout this period, fueled by romantic notions of heroism and honor and glory, right? As well as by imperial ambitions and the belief of the superiority of one's own nation, right? We also had industrialization that took place before this. So technological innovations, particularly within military technology, emboldened political leaders and military strategists, right? So what we're basically saying here, is that okay, we invented these new toys. Let's try it out on each other. That's basically what they're doing. Like, I have a new weapon, it works better than yours. So if you try anything, I can use these weapons on you. And that's one of the reasons why they thought that, war would be so, well, it's a part of chivalry. It's a part coming from medieval era in which going to war and dying in battle is more noble for a soldier, right? It's coming from that as well as the fact that since they have these new weapons, these new toys, they felt that they were somewhat untouchable, right? So the developments such as the machine gun, the artillery, barbed wire, and chemical weapons were seen as game changers that would ensure quick victories and decisive outcomes in the battlefield. So no longer do we have to be stuck in these stalemates, right, of fighting with swords and shields and horses, right, for the entirety of the period of time, and wars will go on for months, right? They think that now that they have these new fancy toys, these new fancy weapons, right, that we can end a conflict in like hours or days, right? So that's what we're looking at, right? So society and colonial competition as well. However, despite the apparent confidence of military powers um, and the belief rather in glory of war, Europe was also facing significant social, economic, and political challenges. Right. So industrialization had brought about urbanization, rapid urbanization, social inequality, and labor unrest. Right. While imperialism had created tensions and rivalries between European powers and their quest towards colonial territories. Right. So especially for the scramble of Africa, right? So I think there's a picture here that really looks at it a little bit. Oh, it's not in here. Okay, especially for the scramble of Africa, right? Scramble for Africa, right? These European territories would actually um, create contests, right, and challenge each other for the exploitation of other people's territories, right? So um, Germany, Sweden, the British, the French, right? Italy would actually have disputes and conferences, right? Especially the conferences of Berlin, right, over the African territories, right, to split up that dark continent that for themselves. So they have colonial competition in that case, and that would actually spark contention sometimes, right? So that was really the state of Europe before. We have a bunch of alliances, right, that all are competing for colonial territories, right? All of them think that their nation is more superior, and all of them have fancy new weapons that they think that could make them somewhat invincible. So what happens with a Europe like that, right? Let's have a closer look, right? Let's look at how the war started. So we started here with the with Serbian nationalism and the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1914. So there was a lot of issues within Serbia. Serbia was now was going. It looks like it was going to become right a complete part of Austria-Hungary. Right. They were desiring independence from Austria-Hungary. Right. So there were a lot of Serbian nationalists, right, really springing up at this time because they think that the Serbian nation is so good, we don't have to be a part of Austria-Hungary. We don't want them to continue to try to subjugate us, right? So what was happening here is that the Serbians had animosity for the leader of the Austria-Hungary, right? And Archduke Franz Ferdinand himself actually had some nasty views of the Serbians as well, right? So they didn't really like each other much, right? But this contention led to the assassination by um Gabrielo Princip, right? He was the assassinator, right? So he led the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, right? The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne by a Bosnian Serb, right? So nationalist in Sarajevo, right? So Sarajevo there, right? That in Bosnia, this is where it took place, right? So Gabriela Princip was the person to actually do it, right? And this was because of Serbian nationalist sentiment within Austro-Hungary, right? So what happened then? No, Austro-Hungarian ultimatum was delivered to Serbia. So in response to the assassination, Austro-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia containing several demands aimed at suppressing Serbian nationalism and punishing those responsible for the assassination. Right? So we have the ultimatum there. Right? This is in German, of course. Right? So the ultimatum of Austro-Hungary to Serbia. Right? So that's what it's saying. So I have in the PowerPoint the ultimatum here, right? So we have the Austro-Hungary's ultimatum, right? So here what we're looking at basically, this is a translated PDF format document, right? That I paste here. So one of the major things was to suppress any publication and insights of hatred toward Austro-Hungarian monarchy, right? That's basically telling them stop having these bad sentiments of us, right? They're asked to delay any type of public instruction, eliminate, right, without delay from public instruction, any type of Serbian propaganda. They're asked to remove all type of propaganda. They were asked, they were forced, right, or they were asking Serbia, right, for, to take, rather, judicial proceedings against any accessories to the crime, right? So these are basically the ultimatum. They're delivering this to Serbia and saying, hey, you should do this, right? So all of these things they were trying to implement, right, within Serbia, right? So there was a Serbian response and mobilization on the 25th of July 1914 where Serbia partially complied.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Could you go back to the last slide, please?
This.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm not gonna really talk about that. All right, but the Serbian response to and mobilization on the 25th of July 1914. So what Serbia basically did was say, okay, it makes sense because a Bosnian, a nationalist, right, Serbian nationalists, right, assassinated the heir to the throne. So we'll accept some of these things. We comply, right? But we won't comply to everything, right? Because they were basically saying that okay, we are one nation. You can't just be just another nation putting all of these restrictions on us, right? That was basically diplomatic suicide, right? You can't do that. It was damaging the diplomatic relations between them, right? And there was a declaration of war on Serbia, right? So after they actually rejected some of the demands. Austria-Hungary just declared war on Serbia, right? So this was a Serbian reply. So if you want to take a screenshot, that would be lovely, right? So it says Serbia will introduce some of these provisions. They're accepting to some of it, but no, you can't see nowhere Serbia is saying that okay, it will not actually comply to some of the more harsher agreements, right, set out in the ultimatum, right? So the Kingdom of Serbia was standing up for themselves, right, after this incident, right? So what was happening now? I'm gonna move to the next slide. So what was happening now, right, was an ally of Serbia, right? Technically wasn't an like an ally, right? But the fellow Slavic state of Russia, right, in support of Serbia on the 30th of July 1914, right, took its military and mobilized its military towards the border. So they moved from Moscow and from Stalingrad, right? And their forces moved towards the border, closer to the Balkans, right? The region in which Serbia and Austria-Hungary and the Austria-Hungarian and Serbia conflict was, right? And it's escalated the tension in the region, right? Because you declare war on Serbia. Serbia is a fellow Slavic nation, right? Go ahead.
So I was wondering, is it that like the Austria-Hungary nation, did they like impose any military things or stuff so that that's why Tsar Nicholas Caesar responded in that way of any sort?
Okay, so there were military operations ensued after, right? So it was an ultimatum, right? So an ultimatum is basically in this case an accept or we will fix it ourselves type of stuff. It's not an agreement, it's an ultimatum really. Right, so Serbia rejected some tenets within the ultimatum, and Austria-Hungary actually started to impose some amount of military operations, right, to get what they wanted to be done, right? So it is seen as a declaration of war, right? On that part. It's seen as a declaration of war of Austria-Hungary on Serbia. Therefore, right, as fellow Slavic nation like Russia actually now mobilize its forces, right, its military forces in defense or in support of Serbia, right? So we have that there, okay? So we have that that really escalated the tensions. Go ahead. Is that fine?
Yes, sir.
All right. So escalating tensions there on Russia's part. Russia, at this moment in history, Russia had been the one of the strongest superpowers the world has ever seen. Right, it's true. Russia is a very, very strong power at this point in history. Right, it would be stronger than okay. It would be akin to us looking at the U.S. now. That is Russia back then. Russia was very strong, right? So when you see Russia mobilizing its forces, it's not a plaything. It's not a game anymore, right? So that those tensions rose enough for Germany to come to support of Austria-Hungary on the 31st of July, 1914. Germany as Austria-Hungary's ally issued a blank check of unconditional support, right? What we call a blank check. Basically, I'm gonna support you. You have to do nothing in return. I'ma support you as an ally, right? So unconditional support for Austria-Hungary's actions against Serbia, emboldening Austria-Hungary to pursue aggressive measures. So now, backed by Germany, Austria-Hungary says, okay, right, we're not as scared at the Russian mobilization anymore. So we're just gonna go on full out attack, right? So now an emboldened Austria-Hungary attacks Serbia, right, with German support, and then the German declaration of war on Russia on the 1st of August 1914. So here the newspaper of the New York Times, a primary source, here states that Germany declares war on Russia. First shots are fired. France is mobilizing and may be drawn in tomorrow. Plans to rescue over 100,000 Americans now in Europe. Right, so this is obviously an American area, the New York Times, right, sending out information on what is happening within Eastern Europe, right? Following Russian mobilization, Germany declared war on Russia, triggering the activation of military alliances and commitments across Europe, right? So we have that there. So on the 1st of August, there was the declaration of war of Germany on Russia, right? So some people know there's an issue here, right? There are some issues here. Some people believe it that okay, Germany started the war, the First World War, so it's Germany's fault. Some people say it's Germany's fault. Is it Germany's fault? Is it Russia's fault? Is it Austria-Hungary's fault? Is it Serbia's fault? I want to hear from you guys. Whose fault would it be? Right? Is there a fault overall? Should there be assigned a fault? What started this war? Some persons look at the fact that it's because of what happened with it with the with the assassination, and that led to tensions between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, so the alliance system was brought into case. Some persons saying that tension, that ultimatum by Austria-Hungary started the war. But some persons are saying now that because Germany and Russia are the major powers, it's the declaration of Germany and Russia that started the real war. Right? But you guys could look at it from different concepts and different areas and seek to explain that. Right? So what's happening here now, right? What happened here was the alliance systems came into contact, right? Remember the Triple Entente. Let me go before the war. Let's go before the war. Get back to the alliance system. Right? Oh, I unfortunately went too far. Right? So let's go before the war, right? Remember the Triple Entente comprising of France, Russia, and Britain? If Germany declares war on Russia, then France has to step in, right? So there was a German plan, right, to really combat France, and what France had done was create what we call the Maginot Line. So it was a line of artillery and defenses along the eastern border of France, right? Generally around the towns, right, of Verdun and Nancy. I'm not sure if you guys, some people here would actually be very intrigued by the First World War. Because personally for me, I have watched all First and Second World War films that are available on Netflix. So I would have learned all about these things, right? From films and from documentaries and stuff, because I'm really fascinated, right? But as an attempt to avoid the Maginot Line, right, to enter France and to attack France because of the treaty, Britain was actually outside of that entire war. They were outside of it. They were saying that, okay, no, we're not gonna attack, right? We're not gonna bring ourselves into this war. But this is the Schieffelin plan, right? Which allowed Germany to really somewhat be able to attack France, right? It's a plan to quickly defeat France, right? But in order for that to happen, Germany had to invade neutral Belgium, right? And Britain had a alliance with Belgium, right? Or a specific agreement with Belgium stating that no matter what, Britain will come to defense of Belgium. So the minute German forces invaded Belgium, Britain was brought into the war as a guarantor of Belgian neutrality, right? So Britain has now declared war on Germany. So what's happening here now? Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, right? Russia comes to its help. Germany declares war on Russia. France declares war on Germany. Germany declares war on Belgium, right? And then Britain declares war on Germany, right? So this is what's happening here. So we have Austro-Hungarian Russian mobilization on the 4th of August, 1914. The declarations of war triggered widespread mobilization across all of Europe. as Austria-Hungary, Russia, Germany, France, and and later on other nations mobilized their armies, their military forces rather, to combat. All right. So large, widespread mobilization across all of Europe, and this is one of the first globalized wars. Right. It's not the first global war, right, but it's one of the first modern conflicts. Right. The alliance system activation, right? We're just speaking about this, right? So the complex system of military alliances included the Triple Entente and the Central Powers, which later on the Ottoman Empire would join in, right? Led to the cascade of declarations of war across each nation honoring its commitments, right, to the alliances. All right. So on the top here, we can see here the Triple Entente and um the the Central Powers. Right? The difference. The chess report are in orange, Chibantant are in green. That is no okay. Those are very coincidental colors, right? But that is what the diagram has. All right. So we have that there. So now the war is started. Now we can have a look at the course of the war. All right. Now, trench warfare and the stalemate was really existed from 1914 to 1916. So the early months of the war saw rapid movements of troops in and battles, but conflict soon devolved into bloody stalemates characterized by trench warfare on the Western Front. Right? Attempts to break the deadlock, such as the Battle of Marne and the Battle of Verdun, resulted in massive casualties but failed to achieve decisive victories on either side. Right? It's important to note that the beginning of this conflict allowed for millions of persons, right, to lose their lives in large conflicts and deadly stalemates. Right? Now, trench warfare. What really is trench warfare? So trench warfare is really the type of combat, right, in which opposing sides really counteract and defend, right, by creating trench systems dug into the ground. So here we have a picture of what trench warfare would have looked like, right? Somewhat, right? So it creates what we term as a no man's land between the trenches. The term origin. Go ahead.
Um, I'm not sure of the name of the poem, but I think we did it in fifth form by Wilfred
Yes, Wilfred Owen.
Wilfred Owen. Will is this like an example of the situation or the events in which he was speaking about? Because I remember him saying something about some gas covering
Yes.
up mouths and stuff.
So Wilfred Owen's poem, right, would be reference to World War, to the First World War, right? So if you read his poem, then you would look at how he thinks or how his experience was of the First World War, or how it really took form, right? So he has some descriptions of trench warfare in his poem. Okay. So a no man's land would actually be created between two trenches, two opposing trenches, right? Because if you have everybody dug up in trenches and everybody have machine guns, right? Anybody that steps on that uncontested territory, right, could possibly be throwing away their lives, right? So the term really originated, originally used to define contested territory or a dumping ground for refuge between fiefdoms, right? So basically, just territory that nobody really wanted, right? It is commonly associated with the First World War to describe the area of land between two enemy trench systems not controlled by either side, right? So that's what's happening here. And of course, we have the advent of the machine gun, right? We must speak about this type of technology. I'm not going to read what's here, but the machine gun was a very important invention, right, by Hiram S. Maxim, the US inventor. The United States invented this machine gun. Well, he invented machine gun, right? Now, before this, we should remember that flintlock pistols and general muskets and rifles were the thing of the day, right? Well, we actually evolved from muskets a long time ago, but rifles, right? I remember this from my history course. I did a history course at UA. The Europe, right? Early warfare within European society, right? So we look at the advent of the machine gun as a turning point within mechanized warfare, right? Or an actual beginning of mechanized warfare. Because before you could have fired probably what, 6 or 7 rounds a minute. Now you can fire up to 600 rounds per minute in one direction, right? And this was termed as a Maxim machine gun because Maxim invented machine gun in 1884, right? So this machine itself could have wiped out hundreds of men in 1 minute, right? And this is one of the important things that we could look at within the advent of mechanized warfare and how important or integral the innovation of technology was, right? With actually driving the course of history, right? So I was just mentioning the machine gun here. I'm gonna change the slides, right? Just mentioning. Right, we also have the tank in 1915. All major combatant powers began experiencing the machine gun technology in the air, right? So we also have the advent of planes, right? Flight, right, was also an important part there, but it became more integral in the Second World War. But we have some amount of flight as well, right? So we have machine guns on the ground, we have machine guns in the air, right? Because remember, before 1903, 1902, the Wilfred brothers, right? The Wright brothers, right? Orville and Wilbur Wright, right? Wouldn't have just invented the plane, right? The flying plane, right? Actually, less than 15 years ago, this is 1915, less than 15 years ago. And in 15 years, we already have fighters, right? And old models of fighter jets in the air. So we're seeing that technology is progressing much and much faster, right? And because of this, we have now the invention of the tank, the British tank, right? In 1916, the tank first saw action in the Battle of the Somme, right? The tank appeared to offer a perfect solution to the machine gun, right? So we have now the advent of tank warfare. All within a 15-year stretch, we have the invention of all of these things just for killing people. I just saw how interesting humans really put the use of science and technology to work just for warfare, right? So we have that there. We also have the advent of poison gas. So we use chlorine, mustard gas, bromine, and different types of phosgene gases, right? A phosphine derivative, right? In warfare. And the German army was the most prolific user of gas warfare. Gas did not prove as decisive as a weapon was anticipated, but the effectiveness of clearing enemy positions and trenches was notable, right? So if you wanted to clear an enemy trench so you could go through no man's land to now capture that trench and gain land in war, right? You could just use poison gas to clear the trench. It would most likely kill all, not probably, if not all, then all of the persons within the trench. And then we now look at the fact that anti-gas measures became increasingly sophisticated, right, to combat against gas warfare. Okay? Have that there. So the globalization of the conflict in 1914 to 1917, the war quickly spread beyond Europe as European colonial empires mobilized troops. Could speak about the mobilization of troops in Kenya, right, to fight German colonies as well. We could look at the mobilization of the Indians, right? So troops from India were sent, right, in order to come to the defense of Britain, right? Caribbean troops were swept up across the Caribbean itself in the first West Indies regiment that was sent to Italy, right, within the Second World War as well as the First World War. Some Caribbean troops were sent, as with Wilfred Owen was sent, right, or participated in the First World War. So the colonies came to the defense, right? Obviously not by their will, came to the defense of their colonizers, right, within the First World War. So this truly became a global war, right, by around 1917. So battles fought in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and the Pacific, involving colonies and their territories of the belligerent powers, and drawing nations such as Japan, Australia, Canada, and the United States into the conflict. So it truly became a global war by this time, right? We can mention the Zimmermann telegram. This is just a slight offshoot. The Zimmermann telegram, right? German legislation to Mexico City. This telegram, written by the German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann, right, is a coded message sent to Mexico proposing a military alliance against the United States. The obvious threat to the United States contained in the telegram inflamed American public opinion against Germany and helped to convince Congress to declare war against Germany in 1917. Right? So the content of Telegram, what it basically was saying, right, it was revealing a plan to renew unrestricted submarine warfare by German U-boats, right? It proposed an alliance with Mexico and Japan if the United States declared war on Germany, right? So it was intercepted by British intelligence and sent to the United States. And there we have the United States enter into the war. Combined with American anger over German resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare, the Zimmerman telegram also was a tipping point. It persuaded the US to join, right? So Woodrow Wilson and his Congress was not having it, right? And they launched themselves into war by sometime after January 19th, 1917, right? So United States was now a part of the war now, and as we saw, they were attempting to revive submarine warfare, and they did, right? So the German submarines are what we call the Unterwasserboats, right? The U-boat, right? What were on a mission to destroy merchant vessels carrying supplies, right? So they're trying to cut off the supply routes of the Triple Entente, right? Trying to make sure that they don't have any more supplies from their colonies, coming from the colonies, right? To assist them in their war efforts, right? So aided by intelligence reports on on the location and destination and the speed of merchant vessels, the U-boats would search the seas for their victims, right? So imagine a war could be happening in Europe, and you're just there, traveling in a little in a ship, right, across, let's say, the coast of Argentina, and then in 2 seconds you're underwater, right? So you could think about that, right? At this time in history, right, this was unheard of, right? So we could think about the shock that the world is feeling as they look at mechanized warfare. Unrestricted US warfare and the entry of the US into 1917, the Germany's use of the unrestricted submarine warfare, including the sinking of the passenger liner Lusitania in 1915, drew condemnation from the international community and ultimately led to the US's entry into the war in April of 1917. So the Lusitania actually was a passenger ship. They thought it was a cargo ship bringing troops and ammunition to France and to Britain, right? But it actually was just a passenger ship, right? And they sank it, right? So it had a lot of US personnel there, so it angered the United States and allowed them to allowed to be one of the reasons why they entered the war, right? The Russian Revolution now was a very important point within the war. Now, the Russian Revolution allowed for the Russian withdrawal from the war to handle the revolution, right? So Nicholas, right, the Tsar of Russia, was having issues with Russia at the time, and then the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik and the Mensheviks, right, had issues with the Tsarist regime and overthrew the regime in the Bolshevik revolutions to create a communist government to install Vladimir Lenin, right? So it led to Russia's withdrawal from the war following the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, right, in 1918, right, March 1918. So Russia is withdrawn from the war now. So it just left up the United States, Britain, and France continue to fight the Ottoman Empire, Germany, right, and Austro-Hungary, right? So German spring offensive, right? We have this now, and we have also the Allied counter-offensive in 1918. Germany launched a series of offensives on the Western Front, aiming to secure decisive victory before American troops could fully mobilize. However, the spring offensive was ultimately repelled by Allied counterattacks, right? Including the Battle of Amiens and the 100 Days Offensive, which pushed German forces back and undermined their morale, right? So we're just looking through the war. Then we lead to an armistice, right, and the Treaty of Versailles in June of 1990. The exhaustion of the belligerent powers, combined with internal unrest and economic collapse, right, in the war, led to significant armistice agreements between November 1918 and January 1919. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in June of 1919, imposed harsh terms on Germany, including territorial loss, disarmament, and reparations, setting the stage for the future conflicts and shaping the post-war world order. So we have peace in June of 1919, right? So that is that. That is the course of the war, and this is just key information throughout the course of the war. All right, and then now we have to look at the effects of the Treaty of Versailles. So territorial changes was what was the first really step that we could look at, right? Treaties redrew the map of Europe, leading to significant territorial changes and dismantling of empires. Well, the First World War is a very crucial moment within world history as empires just completely disappeared. When you speak about Yugoslavia, right, when you speak about these different nations that are no longer alive today because of the First World War, we can note that the First World War is a very important thing, right? And to get you guys to understand the importance of these things, these empires and these nation states have been standing for centuries upon centuries, right? And then in one war, a good amount of them, right, just went out, right, just completely destroyed, removed from history, right, within the first advent of mechanized warfare. Germany was forced to cede territories, right, to neighboring countries. For example, Alsace-Lorraine was given to France, parts of Prussia to Poland, and the territory to Belgium and Denmark, right? Then the Austria-Hungary was now dissolved, leading to the creation of new independent states, right, in Central and Eastern Europe, such as Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Hungary, right? Military restrictions was also put on Germany, right? So we have the fact that the German military was limited to just really over 100,000 troops, prohibiting conscription and restricting development of certain types of weapons, tanks, and aircrafts, right? Then Germany was prohibited from maintaining a large navy and was required to disarm and militarize certain regions, including the Rhineland, right? So the demilitarization of the Rhineland was also an important part there, right? And the Rhineland is right beside of Belgium and France, right? So they asked them to demilitarize all of that area, right? There was also war guilt and reparations. The treaty assigned sole responsibility for the war to Germany. Now I'm asking you guys this, right? Was the treaty right in assigning sole responsibility of the war to Germany? That's a question. Was it justified? Yes or no? No response? Nobody thinks anything of it? Do you think the treaty was right in assigning sole responsibility for the First World War to Germany?
Um, I think Germany played a huge part in the creation of World War One, but I don't think they were um, the only countries that were should be solely responsible for it. Hence, I believe that it was a bit too harsh, and it eventually led to the whole conflict in World War Two.
Okay. So it's a bit harsh. Interesting. That's the same thing, the same sentiment that the people of Germany felt, right? It was a bit harsh. It was very harsh, right, at the time, right? Because remember, we're talking about the glorification of war now. You're already sorely defeated, right? And you know that within this time, you take complete glory and honor from victory in battle. So when you're defeated, it's like your entire reputation is now gone, right? So President Hindenburg had a lot to say about this. Well, let's have a look at this, right? So the exact amount of reparations was later determined by the Reparations Commission and set to 132 billion gold marks, right? A sum that proved to be an enormous burden on the German economy, right? So a large sum of money was also supposed to be given as reparations, right? So the economic impact, specifically now, right, of the treaty in Germany was devastating, leading to hyperinflation, economic instability, and social unrest in the Weimar Republic. Right, the type of government was that was existed in Germany at the time, right? The reparations payments combined with the loss of territory and resources crippled the German economy and fueled resentment and anger among the German people, which is understandable, right? So the political consequences now, the harsh treatments of the treaty, right, or harsh terms rather of the treaty contributed to political instability in Europe, particularly in Germany, where the extremist political movements such as the Nazi Party, which is just a workers' party, right, a fascist workers' party, capitalized on national sentiment and economic grievances. The treaty also strained relations between allies, particularly between France and Britain, as disagreements arose over the enforcement of the treaty and handling post-war reconstruction. Right. So this is where we're going to have, them calling upon their colonies once again to come and help rebuild Europe. So you're gonna have like Windrush in the Caribbean. That is one thing that we have from there. Right, coming over now to rebuild Europe after this. Then we have response to the response of von Hindenburg. Von Hindenburg was the president of Germany at the time, right? His response was somewhat pragmatic, right? He tried to create more political, to actually embolden Germany somewhat economically after the defeat rather, right? So despite Hindenburg's stature as a national hero due to his military success during the war, his actions follows Germany's defeat and marked by a blend of defiance and pragmatism. So while Hindenburg initially resisted accepting the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, viewing them as humiliating, he eventually acquiesced to signing the treaty in 1919. Right, so the decision was influenced by the dire economic and political circumstances facing Germany at the time, as well as pressure from the Allied powers. Right, so this response from Hindenburg really showed his political commitment, right, to the Weimar Republic and to stabilizing Germany amidst post-war chaos. Right, so it's controversial, right, because the German people never wanted him to sign the treaty, but he signed it, right, as he thought that that would be the best decision made for the German people, right? So the world after the war now, the First World War landscape, right, was basically just filled with turmoil, right? So we have a large swaths of Europe left shattered and in ruins, economies destroyed. The Treaty of Versailles really destroyed Germany even more so, right? And it redrew, right, or it started the redrawing of national boundaries and dissolution of empires, created new geopolitical realities, often ignoring ethnic and cultural considerations and sowing seeds for future tensions and conflicts, right? So we had all of these issues happening after the war, right? And then we have a look at Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, right? A vision for peace and cooperation within the world. So amidst the chaos of the First World War, President Woodrow Wilson articulated his vision for a post-World War order. So he had his 14 points. So it was more or less about establishing principles of peace and cooperation grounded in ideas of democracy, self-determination, and international law. Among the key principles calls for open democracy, freedom of the seas, and promotion of national self-determination, reflecting Wilson's beliefs in the rights of peoples to govern themselves, free from external interferences. Right? So you guys can look at his 13 good research his 14 points. But one of the key implementations from his 13 points would have been the establishment of the League of Nations, right? So the League of Nations really was a precursor, right, to the United Nations, right? It was an international organization that really was there to promote peace and prevent any type of future conflict on a widespread scale like this, right? So member states were expected to participate within forums, resolve disputes by discussion, right, and actually uphold the principles and laws handed down by the league to commit to peaceful resolutions, right, and to prevent any other outbreak of another global conflict, right? Since we know there's already a second global conflict, we knew that the League of Nations did not work, right? We already know that, right? So there are always some challenges by the League of Nations, right? So major powers like the United States, right, which failed to ratify the Treaty of Versailles and thus did not join the League. The United States itself had an idea to create a league and it did not join the League, and it limited the effectiveness of the legitimacy of the world on the world stage, right? So what we're basically saying, you now are calling for a League of Nations, and you yourself did not join League of Nations, so it hurts the efficiency, right, of the entire system, right, and legitimacy of the League of Nations, right. Additionally, the League lacked any type of enforcement mechanisms and struggled to compel nation states to abide by its decisions. So two nation states will come and discuss, right, but that the League of Nations themselves could not actually stop, right, the nations from actually just degrading into conflict, right? And the League's reliance on consensus based on decision making and the veto power of major powers undermines its ability to act decisively in times of crisis, right? So this demonstrated its failure to prevent the Second World War, right? And that was really it, looking at the review of the First World War. Any concern?